And now, from the great state of Mississauga in Ontario, Canada, it's the Ted Woloshyn Podcast. Brought to you by ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. ETP Canada. And Tom's Place, for the finest in men's fashion. Tom's Place will suit you. And now, here's Ted.
Well, thanks very much, everybody. Welcome once again to another edition of the Ted Woloshyn Podcast. Much appreciate you taking the time to join us each week. If you're a newbie, as it were, if you're first time joining us, thanks for doing that, and hopefully you will come back and join us again. You know, it was 30 years ago that comedian Kenny Robinson introduced us to his iconic stand-up showcase, which has featured literally hundreds of established and up-and-coming comics. And it is being honored in the acclaimed documentary, People of Comedy, celebrating 30 years of the Nubian Show. And it features, of course, Kenny Robinson. Special guest is Russell Peters, along with Crystal Ferrier, Hassan Fills, and Keisha Brownie.
The Nubian Show, it's not so much finding myself, it allowed me to be myself.
Remember the first show?
I had the matching hat, the shirt. It was big and baggy, had a front pouch like a marsupial.
I had that African dashiki baseball shirt on the first show.
There's no show that can give you that high. The Nubian Show high.
Audience, no vibe, no lineup.
It's a show that allows a space for an eclectic group of people, and that's like the most black thing you'll ever get in your life.
Kenny Robinson, first of all, it's great to see you. More importantly, congratulations. It's 30 years of the Nubian Show. That's incredible. I'm happy for you, man.
Yeah, it didn't. I never planned for it to be 30 years, and now I can't ever think of it stopping. So it's just I'll ride this. I'll ride this out to the end, I guess.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's a terrific thing for a number of different reasons. A, you've introduced people to so many different comedians who may not have had the opportunity, may not have had the stage, as it were. You presented that to them. And also you've opened up the minds to a lot of narrow-minded people when it comes to the kind of entertainment that they like. I guess what I'm trying to say is you forced white people to listen to black people.
There's actually more Caucasian people in the audiences now than when we started. When we first started, it was like 95% black. Now I'd have to say it's maybe 60-40. And, at first I thought, well, they're tourists. And go, there couldn't that be that many tourists in Toronto in February? So, I got to think that, people are just checking out out of a curiosity, or they become fans or what have you.
Yeah. I'm thinking back 30 years ago, the Toronto comedy scene, there were not a lot of black comedians around
in
there.
The country. In the country, they weren't.
Yeah.
We had Evan Carter.
Yeah, sure. I've known
Greg
Evan
Edwards, Eugene Clark, then Ronnie Edwards, myself, and then I think Orson Payne may have joined in, and then Russell Peters, and that was it. From coast to coast, that was it.
Eugene Clark is a name that people may recognize for two other reasons. Number one, he's an actor.
Yeah.
An accomplished actor, and a former pro football player.
I believe he was a Pittsburgh Steeler and an Argonaut.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah. So back then, when the idea popped into your mind, how many comedians were you thinking of putting on? How often were you going to do this? And was this just a see what happens? Or did you think that it could have legs?
It was a let's see what happens. And I started putting more comics on the show. I think I may have had 8 on the show because I don't think anybody other than Ronnie that night had more than 7 or 10 minutes. So in order to make it a complete evening of entertainment, I had to put more acts on. So as it turns out now, it's a 2.5 hour, sometimes 3 hour long running show. And I treat it like a Super Bowl. I go, we're only doing one show a month. So we try to make it an event.
Yeah, I've read that you said, and I remember talking to you about this over the years, that each particular show that we do, you make it like an event. Now that's got to make the comedians themselves feel special, as opposed to, well, just here's another amateur night or another night to walk on and perform. But you give them that extra juice, that extra sense of excitement. Do you sense that?
We still get comics from, there was a comic that was over from England that's got a big following. He had sold out his show at the Opera House, and he And he rushed out of there, was not worried about selling his merch to make it down to the show. And I wound up putting him on after our headliner for a spot. So, the reputation of this show is worldwide, it seems.
But the audiences were they were on page with you right from the outset, because did you not like oversell the first?
Well, we gave away a lot of tickets because we didn't think we'd sell any.
Okay.
And then we sold some, and then Jeff Silverman says, "Come here, do you know what we gave away tonight?" But we turned away about 150, 200 people that night.
Wow.
It was insane. When I pulled up, there's a big lineup down the street, and even the police cars were like, going, so like, what's going on here tonight? And people that went into to buy cigarettes or whatever they were buying, going into the drugstore next door, the employees were like, what's happening? There weren't smash and grabs yet. So maybe the Nubian Show helped. It was like the grandfather of this smash and grab. A bunch of us go in at one time. Nobody knows what's happening.
Right. Now the Nubian Show was actually in I guess not even in part, but it was a tribute to Richard Pryor for a while. Legally, it couldn't have been.
Right. Well, it started out. We need to have a name. I had an idea for a name that everybody went, oh no, we're not going to call that. So and just calling it Black Sunday, everybody said sounds like a horror movie. So I was listening to a band called the Disposable Heroes of Hypocrisy. Say that when you've been drinking and want to request it with the DJ. But anyways, I wanted something catchy like that. And so I came up, well, Nubian is another word saying black. So you don't have to say, soul review or whatever. It's like, okay, Nubian. That's kind of eating with your fingers and wearing the different colored cloths. And I go, well, disciples of Pryor. And I'm thinking, well, if it wasn't for Pryor, I wouldn't have become a comic. So now why am I starting this show? I says, well, because we're disciples of Pryor. So but then after a while, his ex-wife became his wife again, and she was very protective of his name. So I said, well, let's get rid of the Pryor part so we don't get a cease and desist. And then we used to call it All Black Comedy Review. And as my manager, Catherine McCartney, said, we'll never get corporate sponsor with Black Review in there because they associate it with all the crimes that went down on other events in the year.
Right.
Then it became, we never did get corporate sponsorships. So there you go. But it became Kenny Robinson's Nubian Comedy Review. So it's a bunch of names, same thing. Is this a hot dog? No, it's a Frankfurter.
Exactly. Or a wiener, for that matter.
Or a Red Hot.
Or a Red Hot. That's right. So you do the first one and you think, okay, this is great. Now the trick is, it's like everybody can have a first annual golf tournament, a first annual bingo match, a first annual comedy show. Everybody can do a first annual. The trick is, how does this continue? And how do you...
It looked like the talent pool was going to be exhausted after the first 3 months. And then I booked a Detroit comic. I think Sight Unseen, or maybe he sent me a VHS tape, Keith Ruff. And then he was fine. He was great. But better than that, he told all the Detroit comics about it. So pretty soon, comics I hadn't even spoken to were showing up going, can I do time? So, and then one comic says, I'd like to come up. I said, well, we can't give you anything and yada, yada. And they pull up, with about with a car full of comics. So then we went, the shows were hitting 3 hours then, but and the Detroit comics brought a completely different energy with us. There are great comics like Mike Bonner, who's still out there doing great things in Detroit. Bobo Lamb, a white brother, a white dude named Snow Cone, who closes this. Actually, over the years, we found quite a few white comics that, as I teased them, I said, you're the family that couldn't move out when the neighborhood changed. How you know that? How you know that? So quite a few, like A.G. White out of New York said, I never play in front of a white club. And you look at him and you go, you're white. And I go, not only that, but I believe you're Jewish. How you know? How you know I be Jew? So everything about him was, but and the word was getting out. And then we started getting, they were making all these movies in Toronto. So, the cast would say, well, what's there to do in this town on a Sunday? And they go, there's a black comedy show at Yuck Yucks. And they go, Yuck Yucks? I go, no, Yuck Yucks. Repeat up, Yuck Yuck. So they came, and then we had Tommy Davidson was our first celebrity star that did a spot. And then he came back the next month because still took him the time to finish a movie. And he brought Will Smith with Jada Pinkett and Vivica Fox. And I'm so proud to say no one got punched in the mouth that night. So there was that. And then we had Dave Chappelle was in town doing Half Baked. So we had him for 2 shows because he was up here for a couple of months. We had Mike Epps. Then a comic came up from Philadelphia and she said, "Can I bring an opener with me?" And I said, "Well, okay." So she brought, his name was Little Kev. And then my son years later said, do you know a comic named Kevin Hart? I go, "You mean Little Kev?" "Yeah, go in the garage, look for the box that says receipts, and you'll find 2 autographs." So, so Kevin Hart was just starting out. He would make the drive here. And then he cried all the way back to Philadelphia because he learned about the exchange on the dollar.
It's a good thing he's not here now.
He only
And
gets
while
paid
we're
in
at that
American
right
cash
now,
now.
I'm just going to digress here for a second. We're gonna go back to this special because it really is worthwhile for people to see it. It's well produced.
Anton Leo, you know Anton from back in the day.
I do. I remember Anton from years ago. It's a really well done. It's very informative, and it's a great piece of history. It's you want to know about the cultural history of this city and this country. Comedy plays a huge part of it.
Well, absolutely. The thing is, I think it really shows you how multicultural the entire country is. I have Marito Antonio Lopez. So we had a Hispanic comic on the show. Ron Jossel, Filipino on the show. Several types of Muslims. How many kinds of Muslims are there? There's several kinds, and we have one of each. We San Phil's, who's going to be a real barn burner coming up. Then, Mr. Lewin is a bright young comic. Then we went kind of old school with Ronnie Edwards. And then we, of course, the surprise guest at the end of the night was Russell Peters. Local boy does real well. So he came in. Then
Real
Crystal
well.
Ferrier and Sabrina Douglas and Keisha Brownie. So there's, and the thing is, there are about 20 other names that were deserving to have been on the show, but we only had 10 spots.
Russell Peters has some interesting thoughts about what the show at the Nubian Show has meant, and for the comedians, and what it means for the comedic, well, not just the industry, the brotherhood, the fraternity as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, because there were a lot of them and not many of us, and then us got together and kind of circled our wagons. But the thing is, like Joe Bodolai, who I knew from when I finally got a comics on CBC,
Sure,
he
I
came
know.
to the show and he had never seen Russell, and I went, "He needs a comics, huh?" And he goes, "Yeah." So then he got comics, then Comedy Now, and then that got dropped on the internet. Then bang, he was lightning in a bottle. Everybody thought if they put their stuff on the internet ever since, and they become stars. Russell and Dane Cook and maybe 2 or 3 others have the only ones that have climbed to that level. So it definitely was. It gave so many people their first TV exposure as a result of being seen at the Nubian Show.
Yeah. And for some people, I guess it was a difficult thing to understand how if I put this thing on the internet, people are going to chop it up into bits and pieces, and it's going to get scattered everywhere, and I'm not going to get a penny of it, not realizing, yeah, but you get this exposure that your pennies wouldn't be able to buy.
Yeah, to this day, I still haven't really caught on that. Put your thing, yes, but it'll interfere with me selling my own homemade CDs for $10 out of a box at the end of the show. So, I mean, I myself been guilty of thinking small. But now there's people that tell you that if you get enough plays or enough hits, that you'll start getting money from sponsors and from other. Where the money comes from, I don't know. But TikTok, I thought you had to pour water on yourself or jump out of a car as it goes off a bridge in order to qualify. But some people just think crowd work. Crowd works, or as we called it back in the day, spritzing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like when you were working the gigs, it was spritzing.
That's right.
And I guess the Jewish element just left stand up because now it's like crowd work. Yes, crowd work.
It was spritzing, and it was also I got to save my ass here because the crowd is getting more laughs than I am, so I better work really hard.
Well, that's the beautiful thing. Like when people ask me what was comedy like in Toronto when I first arrived here, and I said, well, there was guys like you, there was Frenchie, there was Gary David, there was Fleming, then there was the Rummy Bishops and what have you, and very few of them made the switch from Starvin' Marvin's and those kind of places to the mainstream comedy clubs. So I got in town just as that last horse was breathing its final neigh.
Yeah. Mark Breslin was responsible for you launching the first Nubian Show, correct? he
Right.
offered up Yuck Yucks, and you were taken aback, were you?
Well, no, because see, I'd have done a couple of shows with predominantly black audiences. I did a show with Ronnie and another comic from Buffalo and three hip hop acts at the Opera House, and I was doing all this material about police profiling and all that kind of stuff, race based stuff, and whereas in white audiences, we didn't come here to be preach that. Whereas with a black audience, they're going preach, nigga, preach, so there was a market for what I was doing. And then I started going into the amateur night, and I'm seeing all these kids that kind of like they got the heart, they've got the want, but they're being discouraged. What one comic said, "You look like something off the Apollo," and he was heartbroken. So I went out and I bought a book called The History of the Apollo, and I said, "Well, look at look at all these wonderful people that if you remind him of something off the Apollo, look at Cab Calloway."
Yeah,
Look at James Brown. Look at Flip Wilson. Look at everybody that's come from the Apollo. That is not a put down. That is him anointing you.
that's right.
So I knew we were going to do a show. And then Mark had spoken to Tarandella, who said, "Well, who are you guys to determine what is, we're being judged by a different merit as, being put in front of an all white crowd." So then Mark came to me and said, "Would you want to put together a black show?" And I already had decided. I just didn't know where. And I didn't think I'd ever get I I never thought I'd get the offer to have a Yucks. And they said, "Well, would you want to do it on a Sunday night?" That was the night where nothing was happening. It being the biggest club in the country at the time, it took me a whole 3 seconds to go, sure. And it's been running 30 years since.
At what point did you realize, okay, this thing really is happening? This isn't just like a few weeks or a few months in a row where things are looking good. At what point did you realize this has got real serious legs, like long term,
Me to
years and
lunch.
years leg?
When they
What's
took
that?
me to lunch at the Four Seasons.
Okay.
I said, well, I guess when I saw that we turned away 150 people and they were seeing the possibilities of all it was. So then the pressure was on me to, to find the soldiers to keep the show going. So that's when it became an issue of developing the talent pool.
Now, what about taking the show and across the country? I mean, have you done that? Would you do that?
I did do it. It didn't work. It worked okay in Mississauga. The same night we did it in Mississauga, some other promoter had Bernie Mac about 4 blocks away from us. And I think we drew about the same. So how many people Bernie Mac get? Oh, about 120. How many we get? About 118. So, but of course, Bernie wasn't as big then as he became.
Right.
So, but it's a hard show because it really is a Toronto vibe. As I was doing a joke about Black History Month, I said, or Black Lives Matter. Vancouver had a Black Lives Matter rally, and that killed me because there are no black people in Vancouver. So obviously, Vancouver wouldn't have been one of our hot spots to hit. Halifax, maybe, but we have a DJ, or we like to have a DJ that plays the music that keeps the energy up. We did attempt to do it in Winnipeg, and at the Winnipeg Comedy Festival. I think we would have needed a little bit more grassroots with the community there to have pulled it off. But it was at the Regent Casino in Transcona where I grew up, and I
Yeah, I
was
was going to
thinking,
say.
gee, I was called many racial slurs while growing up in this community. So it had its own kind of what have I gotten into, or isn't life strange kind of moment.
Have you ever had an evening where all of a sudden things get a little touchy between some of the things that have been said? Maybe a white person gets pissed because a black comic said this, or the other way around when you had white comics?
No, because they're outnumbered.
Yes.
No, everybody's there for a good time, and we're not really throwing bombs at anybody. Actually, the funniest and the greatest walkout, I had these 2 white girls from Alberta called the Dirty Show, and these girls were raw. Okay, I'm telling you, raw. And
Uh-huh.
this is me talking. And there was a Puerto Rican family visiting from New York, and they'd been to Second City the night before. Well, the 16-year-old son, he ran towards the door after the first song these 2 girls did. And then his younger brother joined him. Then the mother joined him. So I'm looking at the father, and I go, "You went to Second City last night?" He goes, "Yes, we went to." I go, "This ain't Second City." He goes, "No." So they left. So of course the whole room howled because these two Alberta raw girls sent them running. You think being from New York and being Puerto Rican, you think they'd seen or heard anything, but they weren't ready for that. And sometimes, though, comics would get booed off the stage, which that would be if they didn't deliver. And
Yeah,
I
well,
think
that
that should
happens.
happen everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think every comedian has to bomb at least one major bomb in your lifetime if you're going to proceed with the career.
That and when your career died.
Yeah.
I know the night. I know the night of my biggest bomb, and the people from Letterman were there, and some other people. It was at Ernie Butler's club in Montreal during Just for Laughs. They see me at a gala, then they want to see more of me, and I had the wrong stuff to go with, and that's when the train left without me. So I'm lucky that in this sense, I know exactly the night my career died.
No, your career did not die. You're this. I mean, this is back when you begin these kinds of things, people ask. They say, "Well, did you ever imagine that it would go for 30 years?" Well, of course you can. Nobody ever imagines it goes for 30 years, especially in show business. You can't imagine anything is going to go 30 days. You know,
Absolutely.
and so again, going back to I mean, we realize that, yeah, it's happening. But then when you get to your like 5 years, 10 years, what are you thinking at that time? Do you thinking, how do we expand this? Do we make this better? Do we just sort of take this recipe do we have and just keep preparing this recipe all the time?
Well, we're lucky because, after Joe Bodley, he took the show, and we developed a show called Thick and Thin, which was an hour special that
Mhm.
CBC gave us, and we got nominated for a couple of, I think they're Geminis back then.
That's right.
But that wasn't picked up. So then Ed Robinson, who was with CBC, he moved over to the Comedy Network. And then we had After Hours, which we had 13 episodes. That was great because Trey Anthony, who's had to produce and write her own show that was on Global, Kink in My Hair, that was her first TV acting and writing gig.
Mhm.
Leslie Jones, who was on Saturday Night Live and Ghostbusters. She was recommended to me, so she came up and did stand up. Then we threw her in a sketch, so it was her first time doing sketch for TV. Kevin Hart came up and did his thing, so it was better than the Canadian money that I paid him the time before. So we used them in the show, and we had 13 episodes. And I believe Bell had just taken over it, and they were going on, "You're fired, you're fired." It was like Trump, everybody got fired. So I think I was hiding behind curtains, and they missed us, but we didn't get renewed. And then the saddest thing is later on, just more talent came out. So I was thinking, this is what we did with this. What could we have done? But it was, from what we had, it was great. And people still, like, I had a thing where I had 3 girls that were dancing girls because I grew up in the Jackie Gleason show. So, but we called them the Fat Ass Dancers, PHATT. And these were big girls. And everybody said, "Are you crazy?" And I said, "Everybody loves to see a big woman shake it." And they came out all dressed up, semi backed up budget Supremes looking outfits. And they sang the theme song. Was done by Cardinal Fischel with Julie Black in doing the chorus, doing the backgrounds. In Cardinal, that was his first acting gig. Was he did a sketch with John Paul called "Think About It." So we showcased a lot of people. It opened a lot of doors.
Ted Woloshyn returns in a moment.
I've had the great fortune to say that I've been associated with one of Toronto's finest names in men's clothing for more than 25 years. Tom's Place. Founded by Tom Mahalick's father in 1958, Tom's Place offers brand name men's apparel at unbeatable prices. But more than that, they boast a long-serving, knowledgeable, and friendly staff that can assist you whether you're looking for casual or formal attire. And they have plenty of first-class tailors on site. In addition, Tom and his family are well known for their philanthropic work. So if you're looking to deal with great people who can fulfill your clothing desires at outstanding prices, do yourself a favor and visit Tom's Place. They're open weekdays from 11 to 6, Saturdays 10 to 5, and Sundays noon to 5. You'll find Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Or check them out online at toms-place.com. Tom's Place will suit you.
So my son's mother, she's 36 years old. Right? Doesn't sound that bad. Okay, let me make it bad for you now. I graduated high school in June of 1988. My son's mother was born in July of 1988. I started doing stand-up in 1989. My son's mother was learning how to stand up in 1989. See, it's all about perception. It's about perception.
Now back to Ted Woloshyn.
Contemporary comedy reflects what's going on in society, and when things got really ugly back in the '60s and in the States, and the riots in Detroit and the shit that went down in Alabama and the southern states. I mean, that started to show up in the words that were being spoken by comedians, and that became more divisive because it was finger pointing, and then that seemed to sort of smooth out, and everybody was sort of on the
Well,
same level.
comedy-wise, Dick Gregory, I think, was the main cat at the time, and he
Yeah.
really wasn't finger pointing as much as saying, turning on the lights or going, "What's that on the butter? Looks like a roach," you know? So, and I was living in Chicago at the time, and so was Dick Gregory. So everybody that came through my family's house, I saw Dick Gregory the other night. Did you hear what Dick Gregory said on the radio? So he was, we were always hearing about what Dick Gregory had to say. Like one of the first lines I remember him saying was, I know the FBI's got my phone bugged because I owe $500 to the phone company and they ain't shut my phone off yet. So I know somebody wants to hear what I'm saying. But then again, he was anti-war and he got shot in the leg in Watts during the Watts riots, telling the kids, "Go inside. You're not going to win this. You're going to get hurt." He caught a stray bullet. He got beat up marching with Martin Luther King in Cicero, the suburbs of Chicago. So he got thrown in with those guys. So he was an activist.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that Gregory himself, but what I'm saying is that there was a time there was so much pressure between the white and the black community that it was, these kinds of shows that you're doing right now wouldn't have happened. They would have been more of a battle in an arena. Would have been more of a UFC deal than it would have been a comedy evening. But then things kind of mellowed out a little bit. Now we've got a situation between our two countries where there's a lot of anger going on back and forth. And even in the United States itself, it's like, as if you're a comedian, it's like you go up on stage and you think, okay, am I going to be a Trumper tonight or am I going to be a non-Trumper tonight? I got to read this audience because if I'm a non-Trumper and they're Trumpers, I'm dead no matter what I say.
Well, yeah, and if you're anti the war in Afghanistan or Iraq, I did a gig in Buffalo and they said I was Canadian. They booed me, and I said, "Why are you guys booing Canada? Because you wouldn't go to Iraq with us." And I had that beautiful line. I said, "No, we went to Afghanistan with you, and you killed you friendly, and you start friendly firing us after 3 days. So sorry if we don't go to your second barbecue you invite us to." So the line just came out right there. But I just read something today that somebody said they used to love me till they heard me attacking the anti-vaxxers, the first show after COVID, and I wasn't pro-trucker. So, I mean, we don't even have to go black, white. Did you get
No,
a vax or you didn't get a vax?
that's right. Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, but we are a country or a society that's at splits. I knew a guy that got beat up by some Marines down in California when he was anti-war. Right now, I mean, I don't know what's happened, but in the past 2-3 months, comics I haven't heard of from in the States. I saw him 20 years ago. "Hey, I'd love to come to Canada, heaven," and I go, "Man, ain't you heard about the tariffs? It's elbows up. I'm not booking." If Richard Pryor came back from the grave, I'd say, "Look, you gotta come here to dodge your draft because I can't put you on. It's elbows up. We're strictly Canadian now." And predominantly we have, but I mean they helped us. But I mean, to me, the most material I want to write, and I'm only inspired to write about my hatred of not becoming a 51st state. We'll trade healthcare for school shootings. I don't think I like that deal.
It doesn't seem like a good trade to me either. It's fine. I find it so humorous when Trump talks about, think of how great Canada could be if it was part of the United States. And I'm thinking, yeah, man, I can't wait to spend $1,500 to get an X-ray of a broken finger. Man, I look forward to that day. Won't
But
that
you'll
be
get it
special?
done quickly.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. Is this going to cause any problems, like in terms of bringing? I know you're semi joking, but you're not. But bringing comics over or comics going into the states, are you seeing that this is going to cause problems in the entertainment
It
industry in
might.
general?
I mean, if they're searching your phone for memes,
Yeah.
they could open your phone and went, "How dare you have Musk dressed up as Hitler after he did his salutes? How dare? No, you can't come in." I've got the dual citizenship thing, and so I wouldn't bring my phone across with me. I turned down recently. Somebody asked me to come to a gig in the States, and I said, I'm sorry, but I'm not crossing the border. I'm not crossing the border to shop, not to go to Tops to get some cheap chicken breasts that have been fed with growth hormones, and with barbecue time, you put them on as the size of a football, and everybody's drooling. I'm not going there so I can get 7 for $5. I'm not going to Tops for that. I'm not crossing the border to buy those fancy suits that I become known for. And right now it's war torn.
It's unfortunate because what's happening is you've got people who have collaborated in the past on films and music, and whether they be comedic films or dramatic films, who are now put in this awkward position where it's like you can't really work together because it's like, well, whose film is this? And is this a Canadian thing? Is this an American thing? How is it going to be taxed? How is it going to be, people, Americans are pissed off at Canadians, Canadians pissed off at Americans. I was looking at the numbers today. They're talking about how many people are not coming into Canada now, how many people are not going into the States. And it's just, the one man has somehow turned the whole bloody continent and most of the world upside down.
It's crazy, it's right now. I feel, somebody says you want to cut a deal with with the Red Chinese. And I go, Red China's not talking about making us a 51st province of their country. So I'm more scared of Americans than I ever am of the Reds now. But on the other hand, I'm hoping it gets worse. Think about all the Canadian talent that has to pack up their Winnebagos and come back. Can you imagine if you somehow, Ted, you got a gig to open for Jim Carrey up in Barrie? Wouldn't it be great to have him back? Mike Myers, he hasn't been as visible in the past 10 years after he did that Dr. Seuss movie. And now every time you see him, he's got a Gordie Howe jersey on. He's got a Canadian Tire shirt on. So I'm thinking, look at the talent drain. They made the money. They could come back and they could actually finance and help things in our industry improve.
You're right. They could be if all of a sudden they started making their films and their television specials and their documentaries here. It would be a huge boost to our economy if you could sell that product to the United States, because our market just isn't big enough to justify making the big money, right?
We make a smaller market. They've made their bread, and look at with the exchange on the dollar, they wouldn't have to bring as much money home to do it with.
Yeah, that's right. I'm telling you, we're going to be bringing back the Canadian Tire dollar soon, because I think it's actually worth more than the real one right now.
I like it better than Loblaw's last scam, where you spent so much money and they gave you stamps so you can get a new set of pots. And then when you finally had the stamps, they ran out of pots. Oh, yeah. So I'd rather have my Canadian Tire money know I'm just getting some windshield wiper fluid. At least I know what I'm getting with it.
What are you seeing in terms of the younger comedians coming up now? I'm talking about kids who are in their like 20s and early 20s who are just starting out. Do you see them with the same mindset that you were at that age, or do they look at comedy as a different venue for expression?
Well, I mean, you've got some that, welcome to Cut My Wrist Theater. But you get those all the time anywhere, every generation, but then I find that they're more business savvy. They've learned that, like a place like the Comedy Bar, they pay $100 to have the room for 90 minutes, and they book their shows and they hustle their tickets, and they find out that if they sold out the 75, 80 tickets at $25 a piece, after they pay everybody out and pay their rent on the room, they walk out as producers. So I think, I think they have a greater entrepreneurship than we had when we were comics. Because somebody says, "Here's your $200, kid, and have whatever you want on this menu." Things have changed since then. So, and I think also because there weren't as many places to perform as there are now. Sometimes I think there's a glut. Mark had one great phrase he used. He goes, I don't want to see the balkanization of the industry. And to some extent, they've got that, because you've got a lot of places now paying you $75. It's like if somebody's got a room, they think they've got a great thing by getting a room at one of the old Fox and Fiddles or any of those roadhouses we used to play. And, and they go, yeah. And I say, hey, back in those days, that was a $500 for 3 comics Sunday night gig. That was real money back in 1987. You're getting a drink ticket. What are you guys doing? You've sold our market. We fought a long time to get that kind of money, and now everybody wants to get in the act. Everybody wants to get on stage so bad they're willing to they're willing to do it for free. They got even worse. They got bringer shows where you get on only if you have 5 paying customers. Well, if you got 5 paying customers, then you may as well try and get 10 paying customers, because then you pulled in $250 at the door, and it's your door. So I think that in that sense they're learning that. So I think the young comics, I mean, the hunger's still there, the talent, but they're more savvy. They know that if they get this on on the internet, how many people are going to see. If they hashtag this, more people will see their ad for the show at such and such club. It's like everything, progression and change and growth.
For people who aren't familiar with the comedy scene and aren't familiar necessarily with your work, for them to sit down and turn on into Crave to watch People of Comedy celebrating 30 years of the Nubian Show, what do you expect for those people who don't know exactly what to see, and why should they watch this?
Well, first of all, they're going to see some comics that they've never seen before, and some of them are going to hear something a little bit rawer than they're used to. Or they may just say, man, I've been waiting to hear something like this for a long time. A lot of people say, oh, you can't do jokes about stereotypes anymore. Well, on our shows, you can. Because like Crystal Ferrier, she does this great joke about she went to Jamaica, and a dude walked up and he started to squeeze her neck. He goes, I'm going to murder ya, pum, pum. And in the audience howls, because, that's not a very romantic phrase. And she goes, and that's how I met my husband.
Funny.
So I mean, there's comedy like that being thrown out there. Sabrina Douglas, she's doing all the festivals now. She's great. She does everything from her brother being arrested in Mexico, and the Mexican police calling their house asking for bail money, and the fuck goes, not today, and hangs up, and says, if you're gonna keep him, teach the boy to speak your language. Then he hangs up again.
Yeah.
She also works as a nurse. So she talks about 105-year-old racists that are dying, going, I want to die, you. And, I'm not sure if this one made the cut, but she says, when you go to nursing school, they don't teach you what to do when they die. So there you are trying to close your eyes and you don't really want to. So there's all kinds of wonderful comedy that you may not have caught before.
Let's talk for a minute about the Canadian Comedy Hall of Fame, of which you are president. And
Yes.
kudos to you on that.
There was no election. I almost felt like a banana republic. Who will be president? I will be president.
Well, I didn't want to say anything about how you became president. I just said congratulations that you're the president. It doesn't matter how you got there. You're there.
It was fixed. It was stolen.
You would think that an industry which is so rich with talent, and Canadians brag all the time about the great comedians that have come from this country, going way back to Wayne and Schuster, to
even before that.
and
last year we put the Happy Gang in, who I wasn't familiar with.
That's right, of course.
Kim Progash, he can name you all these French groups that did the CBC radio during the war, and we're trying to acknowledge them at the same time as I'm trying to get Evan Carter in, and I'm really trying to get McLean and McLean in.
Yes, you got my vote on that.
And yet McLean and McLean is our Lenny Bruce. Got busted for obscenity, freedom of speech. Maybe not as political as Lenny was, but I mean, every comic that goes on stage and says something offensive now stands on the shoulders of those two brothers from the Maritimes.
I believe that there's a time and place for everything, and that if you set up a comedy club or a comedy show and say, okay, what you're going to see here tonight is no holds barred. Understand what that means, no holds barred. You may be insulted, but don't take it personally, because there are no holds barred. Now, you can't take that same show and put it on CBC, because they have to have parameters. And as long as people realize, okay, you're going on that show, don't say this. But if you're going to a no holds barred, then nobody should get pissed off. Nobody should walk out. You don't have to laugh necessarily, but if you want to laugh and you think it's inappropriate, damn it, you should laugh, because again, no holds barred. As long as
you don't know what holds are not barred until you get thumbed in the eye. There's no eye gouging. Yeah, eye gouging's allowed, but he bit my ear. Hey, it's all good.
Well, it's like I could never understand, why are there rules to war? Why, you know what I mean?
There's not. There's Geneva Convention because of Canada.
But
Apparently, our boys got
nobody
some.
follows those rules. Do you think Putin is following rules, the rules of war,
He
rules of
said to his
engagement?
soldiers, "I want you to fight like Canadians."
Yeah.
But I mean, they developed the Geneva Convention after everybody went, and then the Canadians did this. Those guys did that. Yeah, I mean, I myself, but even then, like, I won't book comics that do rape jokes.
No, no.
But if a female comic comes up and talks about something, I thought he was going to rape me, and they walk right by me. I'm going, what's wrong with me? I'm going, okay, that's a different slant. That's a
Yep.
different angle.
Yep.
And it's her point of view, her thoughts. So I'm not going to, say, well, come share that with us.
I saw
So
I saw a comedian at a club in Hamilton years ago, and he went into a whole routine about rape. And I was sitting with some people, and I was thinking, like, get this guy off the stage, man. This is so inappropriate. There's nothing funny about that. There's just nothing funny about that. And I even look around the room and I see there's some women laughing at it. And I'm thinking, are they laughing because they're uncomfortable? Or do they really think this is really funny? Or are they just doing it because they want to fit in somehow? I didn't get that at all.
it's all different, and the bottom line is if the guy gets more complaints than laughs, he won't be back. And people ask me, will I censor the comic does something that's this or it's that, and I go, well, for me the bottom line is if the audience will reject it immediately. So if they reject it, then I'm going to go, you might not want to do that bit again. So
Did you have to do much editing on the documentary?
Oh, which was a beautiful thing. But then anything that anybody used that may have raised some eyebrows, the editors from behind the curtain, where the Wizard of Oz control things, they decided that. But as far as the comics themselves, I selected. I put in my big list of names, and then each time I did, the list got smaller till it got whittled down. But the ones I put on there were the ones that I thought that would represent. And if I thought there was anything that I'd be ashamed of or embarrassed, I didn't put their name on the list. Are there some that pushed the edge? Yes, my entire career I was known for pushing the edge or going beyond it. So that's why anytime I pull you aside and go, I don't know about that stuff you're doing, then you're really out of line if I'm taking you aside.
Well, I'm thinking if Kenny Robinson pulls me aside and says, man, that's in bad taste, I'm thinking, oh, God, really?
Or I'll just say, there's a lot. You're blindfolded with nothing but cow pies in the field. You really need to walk slower with that.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of comics. They think they can go up there and do something that's homophobic or what have you. And I go, hey, a lot of guys that book rooms or book tours or circuits or make decisions on TV, they may have a problem with what you're saying. So Jason Rouse, great comic. He did a special with Andrew Dice Clay for HBO. And he made a joke about something that affected the producer. It was close to the producer's reality. And Jason's slot got cut off or reduced. So, I mean, there's also accountability. There's freedom of speech, but there's accountability. And I learned a long time ago, don't say nothing that you don't mean or that you're not willing to stand up for. It's like today I was a little hurt when I read, I used to love Kenny till he came back against the anti-vaxxers. And I went, he doesn't love me anymore. I'm going, well, if he doesn't love you anymore because of I said, you're diabetic with high blood pressure and you're over 60. I said, you were vulnerable. I said, so somebody coughed their sneeze, I could have been gone by then. I said, so he didn't love you anyway, Kenny.
Yeah.
So, that's the nature of the business. You're going to offend some people, you're going to upset some people, and other people are going to love and be grateful that you said something that other people haven't. That's the nature of
You,
what we do.
you mentioned Gordie Howe and the whole elbows up concept. And because for those people who don't know, Gordie Howe was one of the greatest hockey players of all time. Great, prolific goal scorer, just a terrific goal, a strong son of a bitch, and who was known for his use of his elbows. But he was never he was feared by people because of his ability to use his elbows when needed, but he was never considered to be a dirty player. To me, that's genius. If you could be that tough and that rough and scare the shit out of so many people without anybody really thinking that you're a dirty player, that's pretty cool.
Well, also he had that big fight with Lou Fontaine where, Fontaine had eyebrows behind his ear by the time the fight was over.
Yeah, but
So everybody kind of like, we don't really want to drop the gloves this shift.
yeah.
So I was reading that Gordie Howe, a lot of people hated him. Oh, he was dirty. He wasn't dirty. He was just Saskatchewan farm strong.
Well, that's
And
what I'm
if
saying.
he hit you, you stayed hit.
Yeah. If you considered him to be dirty, it's probably because you thought you were tougher than him and he cleans your clock.
Oh, but it was a whole different nature back then. I mean, guys weren't even worried about, high sticking battles. I mean, I remember seeing this documentary with Eddie Shack and somebody else, and they're just carving each other's face up, and your dad's wearing his best suit and a fedora, and he's clapping for it, So, and then
Yeah,
they got 5 minutes, no game penalty, no suspended, just 5 minutes.
yeah.
So, and no instigator. So it was a different time. But I think Gordie, though, represents Canadian toughness and also excellence. Not only did he score the most amount of goals, but he didn't have to have another player to protect him when he was out there.
Isn't it interesting and even ironic at this point that here we are about to unveil this bridge that spans
How Bridge.
the Detroit River between Windsor and Detroit, that's named after Gordie Howe because he was beloved in Detroit because he played for the Wings for so many years, and beloved in Canada because he was a Canadian. And that's the guy who sort of managed to reach across the river to bind us together. And yet, just as we're on the eve of opening this bridge, we're on the eve of not needing this bridge because there's nobody going across it.
That's sad, but don't forget, he also wound up being a Hartford Whaler before it was all said and done. Economics, make you do things that normally you wouldn't have thought of doing.
Congratulations to you on the Crave special. Hopefully it'll be around for a long time for people who want to check it out. It's
We're
there.
trending right now, so, and I figure, hey, if Gordie Howe can play 40 years, then the Nubian Show's got at least another 10 because, we score goals and we're rough. We take care of ourselves.
And you're still doing every Sunday night a different event.
No, it's the last Sunday of the month.
Every month on the final Sunday of every month.
Yeah.
You're a busy man.
I'm going to get busier.
Good. I hope you do. I can't thank you enough for spending the time to chat with us. And again, congratulations to you and to everybody who appears on this and is a part of this great documentary. I highly recommend it. It's available right now. People of Comedy, celebrating 30 years of the Nubian Show. Check it out on Crave.
Canadian. Don Cherry's like, good guys. They're brown, but they're good guys. Saturday night just sucks without him.
Yeah. All the best to you. And Sunday night sucks without you if you ever decide to walk away. A lot of people.
That won't happen.
Yeah.
Unlike MacArthur, I'll just fade away. Thank you.
That's going to do it for another edition of the Ted Woloshyn podcast. Check out our website, www.tedwoloshyn.ca. Check out our past guests, which include Kenny Robinson, by the way. You can hear him talk before he talked today. Does that make any sense? And also, too, when you're online, fill out your organ and tissue donation card. You could change or even save a life. In the meantime, have a great week.
The Ted Woloshyn podcast has been brought to you by Tom's Place. For the finest in men's clothing at unbeatable prices, it's Tom's Place at 190 Baldwin in the heart of Kensington Market. Tom's Place will suit you. And ETP Canada, providing estate administration with ease. Technical production by Paul Gadd. Music by Bike Thieves. For more on this podcast and our sponsors, and to talk to Ted, go to www.tedwoloshyn.ca.